All right, welcome everybody to Legal Tech Week for December 2nd, 2022. We are back after a couple of weeks off, thanks to travel and Thanksgiving and whatever else happened over the last couple of weeks. A lot did actually happen over the last couple of weeks, but whether we'll get to all of it or what we'll talk about remains to be seen. But I am Bob Ambrogi, and I write the blog Law Sites and the podcast Law Next. And how have you all been? Missed you all over 2 weeks. It feels like a long time.
Oh, it has
Good.
been.
Alive. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's introduce ourselves. And let's see. Stephanie, you want to kick us off?
Sure, why not? I'm Stephanie Wilkins, the
Why not?
editor-in-chief. Yeah, why not? Editor-in-chief of Legal Tech News at ALM. And yeah, it feels like it's been forever since I've seen you all.
And you are rich on predictions for 2023. So maybe
Oh,
you can
yes.
give us a
I'm
preview of a couple of those later
I
in the
know.
show.
Well, when I get a chance to read them, I'll be happy to give you everything that's going to happen next year in legal tech.
Yeah. And Niki.
My name is Niki Black. I am the Senior Director of SME and External Education at my case. I almost defaulted to my old title there. I write legal technology columns for Above the Law, ABA Journal, the Daily Record, and I also write 2 different reports for my case, the Legal Industry Report and some benchmark report each year. And Legal Industry Report's coming out in a couple of weeks. So look forward to that. I'm sure you're all on the edge of your seat.
Canceling Christmas right now, just to make time for that. Steve.
Hey, Steve Embry here. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads about legal technology, innovation, and whatever else kind of strikes my fancy. I am also chair this year of the American Bar Association. Can't talk today. Law Practice Division. So I always have to give that plug. And before all that, I was a practicing lawyer with a big law firm for more years than I'd like to think. It's good to be back.
And last but not least, Joe.
Hey, Joe Patrice from Above the Law and the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast. We've been gone for a while. It's been kind of exciting for me because my exciting news is I invested a lot in crypto this year and it went up all summer. And I'm thinking I'm going to get out right around January.
Hopefully you're kidding.
Oh, yeah.
I do still have money in crypto, I'm afraid to say. The funny thing is, for the money I have in crypto, I still am up from what I originally put into it, but not by anywhere near as much as I once was. And now I'm like afraid to take it out because I'm sure it's going to go back up at some point. I don't know what to do about it.
I was gifted crypto at one point that I totally forgot about until right now. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if it's actually worth anything.
Well, it depends on when you got it. But maybe if you got it long enough ago, it could be worth something.
I was gifted it in 2020.
That could be close.
Yeah.
Probably would have wanted to cash it out about a year ago.
Yeah, I know, but it was frozen at the time, so that was fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, and let's see. Jean is away on vacation. Caroline is doing stuff. Victor, we think, is on paternity leave. So who else are we missing? I think that's it. I don't know where to start this week. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. Joe and Steve, oddly enough, have kind of related themes to their stories this week, but I kind of feel like I want to start talking about with the Reynen Court news, only because in terms of like the news that sort of shook up the legal tech world over the last couple of weeks, that might have been one of the biggest stories. The news that Reynen Court was laying off staff, cutting back on its support of the vendors, and generally, it had just a few months. In September, it had launched this odd sort of internet offering, not quite an IPO, but an online stock offering to try and raise some money after having just raised a whole bunch of money earlier this year. So it leaves everybody kind of wondering what's the future look like for Reynen Court? And Stephanie and Law.com had a good article on what's this mean, kind of what does this portend for the legal tech industry more broadly. I actually think Reynen Court was a really good idea, and I would love to see them succeed, and I hope they, they're not dead yet, that's for sure, and I know they're still out there looking to try and raise some more capital and beating the bushes to try and do that. But I think their idea of trying to provide a way for larger law firms to be able to kind of test software in a secure environment where it's easy to deploy things, and where they all didn't have to go through all the kind of licensing headaches to try and get the test environment set up and everything. It made a lot of sense, and it seemed like a good way to try and get firms to get a little more comfortable with cloud-based software, which is really what they were focused on. So I don't know. Anybody else have any thoughts on what this all means? Stephanie, I know you guys covered it, so.
Yeah, I mean, it was also just such in a quick period of time. I mean, just for perspective, I mean, I've been in this job less than 3 months, and it was the first embargoed story I got in this role was their crowdfunding raising, that fundraising. And now already we have them canceling that, cutting staff, and it's just sort of, because all of these big, and this is sort of the gist of our article, is that big tech has had this massive amount of layoffs in it and hadn't really hit small tech, legal tech yet. And then this is sort of the first example we're seeing. So is it going to trickle down? I mean, their idea was really novel, but was that a problem? Where's funding going to come from in the future? I think it just raises all these questions that I'm not answering at all right now because I don't know. But maybe my predictions that I'm getting an answer it somewhere in there. But it was just really, I mean, a notable about face in a very short period of time.
What surprised me was the statement to the effect that there would be some service disruption. That really surprised me, because that's to admit that the layoffs were going to affect their service when that's what they're selling is their service, right? So that was pretty striking to me that they felt the need to actually include that as part of their statement, and which implies to me that it's going to be pretty disrupted if they feel the need to sort of add that caveat to it. So I found that very unusual. Maybe that was it just me? Did that jump out at anyone else?
No, I mean, I just reading the tea leaves, you have to sort of wonder when any company, particularly startup company, gets to that point that quickly, whether they can actually survive it, and whether the ending may just be inevitable. I hope that's not the case, but it sure sounds pretty grim.
Yeah, and I think it will be. I mean, maybe they don't know yet, or obviously they don't want to admit how bad it'll be if they do know, because even Isha talking to Andrew Klein, he was like, he wouldn't confirm anything for sure, but he's like, layoffs are coming, there is more coming. So it's just, and that's in the article, but it's so, I don't know, maybe they're hoping they can turn it around. Obviously nobody wants to broadcast how bad things will be if they can hold off on that, but
yeah, I was their lack of sort of much in the way of comment on this. I forget how I originally heard about this, but it was before it was reported anywhere, and I decided I know Andy Klein. I've met him a number of times. Really nice guy, smart guy, and I wanted to give him an opportunity to comment before I wrote anything, and reached out to him, and he just didn't respond, which is like not like him. And then when he finally did respond, he's like, "Well, give me till tomorrow, and I'll get back to you." And it's like, they're just like getting their ducks in a row or something. That when that happens, and then when he did finally. He said he would call me, and then he said, "Well, I'm not going to call you, but I'll give you some answers in an email." And it kind of went around like that. But the story that Isha wrote for you, Stephanie, is she raised this question of is this sort of the canary in the coal mine for legal tech companies? And I don't think it's that. I don't think what's happening with Reynen Court it tells us anything about legal tech companies, because I think really what's happening with Reynen Court, I think that the fault is actually more with the law firms that have been reluctant to sort of adopt this model that they've created for trying out software. Yeah, they've got this core group of big name law firms that have invested in them and supported them, but I think they've had trouble gaining traction with law firms beyond that core group. And I think, I think internally, from everything I've heard, they've had some struggles also just getting, I mean, the whole model is like getting all the software containerized so that they can, put it onto their platform or make it available to firms to put on their own, operate in their own environments. And I think there was a lot of trouble. I think there were a lot of issues working with some of these vendors to get this containerization accomplished and all of that. So I think there were just a bunch of roadblocks they hit that kind of independent of the whole issues facing the tech industry more broadly right now. I think this has been, in a way, a long time coming, but.
Yeah. Well, and then somebody also mentioned, I don't remember who it was, obviously not anyone we could quote, but like looking back on how the sort of the crowdfunding move was so unique, but was that also maybe a negative sign that we didn't realize back then, that if they had to, was it like a desperation move, and desperation move sort of wrapped up into cool new optimism,
Yeah. I think, and some people even said it at the time,
Yeah.
I raised that question of, given that they just raised this money, is this, what's really going on here that they would do that? But so who knows?
I mean, the thing that always kind of struck me about their whole model is that they're kind of in a weird place, because it's a really cool thing, but the people they're largely trying to sell it to are the exact type of firm that has the resources to create their bespoke solutions and don't really need the opportunity to kind of test it out in that kind of app store framework. So it's kind of like, it's a really cool idea, but unfortunately the people they were aiming it at largely were the only group that didn't really need it in law. That was always my takeaway.
And part of rolling out a product is validating your concept and then ensuring there's a product market fit. Just because it's a good idea or it's a cool idea doesn't mean that the market you're trying to sell it to is willing to buy it or is ready to buy it. As we saw that like with Tally, for example, super cool idea, super forward thinking, but no one was ready for it. So you got to not only validate the concept, but also ensure there's a product market fit in terms of them not just saying, yeah, that's a cool concept, but I'd actually invest some dollars into it, right? So if you don't do that up front, you end up in this situation sometimes.
Well, but didn't they sort of do that by they kind of pulled together this consortium of law firms to back them from the get-go. I mean, they had a whole bunch of so-called clients or customers right from the get-go saying, we're signing on to this. We think this is a great concept. So
you gotta have a growth plan too, not just a handful of customers up front. I mean, you gotta have a plan to actually grow over time and exponentially if you really want to have a successful company. It's especially in today's environment, which is pretty competitive.
Yeah.
Although I have to say that the amount of business sense that many lawyers have, for them to say this is a great business idea and it'll really work, probably is may not be the most ringing endorsement that there could be.
Yeah. Well, we at least still can't talk about them in the past tense, but who knows what's going to happen with them over the coming year. Unfortunately, they did lay off a fair enough. Nobody seems to know exactly how many people. That partly because nobody knows how many people they employed in the first place. But it was always a little bit vague around that. But definitely some good people have been laid off, including Sarah Glassmeyer, who's sometimes I haven't checked if she's here today, but she's often in the audience on this show, and others. So I wish all those people well.
And before we go too far down, burying Reynen Court, we have to remember there's a lot of layoffs going on right now. It's not just them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, and I agree. But to go on to touch on what you said, Bob, that our article was looking into whether this was the canary in the coal mine, and I don't think, I mean, we don't know, but ultimately, I mean, no one seems or hopes it isn't. So, I mean, most of the layoffs, there's so many people laid off, but a lot of it hasn't hit big tech. So I don't think this is like doomsday, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and others
Okay.
have laid off, like Law Geeks laid people off very recently, and then the law firm Cooley announced layoffs. And so, everyone's heading into the new year with some trepidation about the economy. And I think the larger a company is, the more conservative they're going to be heading into the new year, and in terms of their like next year planning, and also just in terms of expenditures. They're just going to be conservative about it, just to hedge their bets and make sure that they're positioned to thrive if we do go into a recession or if we don't. You got to play it safe. And so, a lot of signs are pointing towards a recession, including, and every day when you hear more about these layoffs, it's especially in niche like legal tech versus the large.
Yeah.
I don't
mean,
know. The GDP report was up today, so.
The Law Geeks point is interesting though, because I mean, that was notable when it happened because you didn't see that a lot. And at the time, there was a lot of people trying to blame like, oh, the tech was overpromised, the AI was overhyped. That, well, maybe that wasn't the whole story. Maybe, I mean, I don't think we'll see a ton of these. It's not going to be a mass layoffs in legal tech, but it probably won't be the last.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, speaking of the economy, while layoffs are happening and people are losing jobs, the prices of legal services and legal related services seem to be going up, and we happen to have two stories this week dealing with that. Both Steve and Joe has stories. So, Steve, you want to kick it off with talking about yours?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've come across several articles and surveys that basically were kind of pointed toward two things. One, that law firms are really interested in raising their rates in 2023 to, I don't want to say unheard of levels, but certainly more than the norm. And I think part of that stems from the fact that, there are a lot of firms are coming off record profit years. And, there's, as I've frequently said, there's nothing that raises the ire of your partners if you're a managing partner than to tell them that you're going to make less money next year than you did this year. That doesn't so when that happens, there's two choices. You either, as a law firm, you either cut costs, lay people off, or you raise rates. And it's always been tempting for law firms to raise rates because most of the time clients will bitch and moan about it, but at the end of the day, they just accept it. But there's talk this year, I think, that or next year that clients won't be so accepting, that they're really sort of outraged by the attempt of law firms to raise rates, which I think is a little ironic because law firms are businesses too, and they're hit with the same inflationary pressures that all businesses are hit with. So the rates that the proposed rate increases may not even keep track with inflation in some cases. But in any event, it's kind of a perfect storm on the one hand, or it would appear to be on the one hand. But as I've also said several times, the legal market is pretty segmented, so it's hard to make a sort of a blanket. The clients are not going to stand for this, or law firms aren't going to get their way. I mean, it's clearly in bet the company kind of cases, rates don't matter, never will matter, because, a bad result means you're out of business sort of by definition. So who cares what the rate is? And that's one class of cases where it makes a little difference. The other class of cases is cases that are important enough to the business where results really do matter. And so paying extra to get a more experienced or established lawyer who might raise his or her rates next year really doesn't matter because you're really more concerned with the liability, the substantive result, and than you are with the rates. And then, of course, there's the third class where, as people often say, getting a C job is fine because, by the time you add the cost of the C job into the result of the C job, it's it's going to be more if you pay more rates. So you're better off paying less in rates and getting a less substantive result. So the trick, I think, has always been for lawyers to try to fit themselves into the first two categories, either the bet the company or very important cases. And I always think it's kind of funny because lawyers are, particularly lawyers in law firms, are really good at persuading and communicating, and they're really good at the sky is falling. You really need to take this matter very seriously because this could happen and that could happen. And oftentimes they're talking to in-house counsel who are also lawyers, who are also extremely risk adverse, who hear all this sometimes BS and say, oh my God, you're right. I guess I better pay. And I think that's in part what's been able to drive continued rate increases for a lot of law firms over the years. So I think it will remain to be seen. I think there will be some law firms that will be taking a hit from their clients, who are doing more commoditized work, and they're not going to be able to get away with the sort of standard, we'll raise you 5% this year, and not even tell you,
Yeah.
which often happens. They don't even bother telling you. They don't even notice it till the year's 3/4 gone. I said, wait a minute, I thought your rate was $300. What is this $350 stuff?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
So this dovetails also off of when those of us who went to CleoCon, like that report did show that lawyer rates that they were tracking, which is obviously one sector in that kind of two-tiered sector that Steve was talking about, they were underperforming inflation and had room to increase their rates. Now, it's kind of unfortunate that it opens up a whole other can of worms, which is the thing that I've talked about a bit on this show, is the looming less important but still important access to justice issue of the middle class and small businesses being priced out of small firms, which is coming. But put that aside, there is room at that sector to grow. And then as far as the other half, the big law half, there is, as an old econ major, I would say there's a near infinite elasticity in the Am Law 50. You could keep raising those rates forever, and somebody's going to keep paying it because nobody gets fired for hiring Cravath. And so, yeah, it's going to track inflation to the extent inflation is here. It's probably going to be less than inflation. They're probably going to do the usual where, yeah, we're charging more, but we're writing off more, and you're actually getting a discount. And by the end of the day, these clients are going to pay more. They're not going to realize they're paying more. They're going to grumble, and then they're going to do it anyway, and we move on. But yeah, it's going to keep getting more expensive for everybody.
Yeah, the Clio survey had found that they tracking 3% below inflation for smaller firm lawyers. It would be interesting to see. I mean, I agree with you. There's sort of infinite elasticity among the larger firms, and they can just keep raising, and the clients are just going to keep paying because they feel that they have to have these firms. There's that myth that they need to have these big firms for their big cases. But so it just seems like an entirely different world with smaller firms, and they don't just so automatically raise their rates. And I think they're much more attuned to, even though there is this sort of looming crisis of rates, even among smaller firms going up. I think the smaller firm lawyers are much more attuned to their clients' inability to pay and what that portends for them. I think that's one of the reasons that all the e-payment processing applications recently have added the payment financing and different kinds of financing and pay over time options for their clients to try and make it more palatable for them. So it's sort of like two different worlds. It'd be interesting to sort of track small firms versus large firms and what's happening in the fee development here.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Bob. It's we often, I'm guilty of this, falling into the trap of sort of doing a blanket assertion about law firms and the legal profession, when really it's composed of all these different sort of business models with different customers and different plans and different motives. And I mean, there really are different businesses, just like the car business is different than the travel business in a lot of ways. I mean, it's so what you say when you say what's going to happen with rates at big law, that's a completely different question. What's going to happen with rates at solo or small law law firms. And that doesn't even take into account the broad class of lawyers that make their living with contingency fees that, that are completely rate agnostic because they don't care. I mean, it's a question of whether there's 30, 40, or 45% and whether they make a good bet or not. And that's so completely, again, a completely different business model with different concerns. So it's an interesting profession because it's not one. It's not. I don't think it's even like doctors are more monolithic than law firms.
Yep. Well, I also in the on the topic of price increases, Joe, you've got a story, not even your story or not even an above the law story, but reaching out into the broader world of legal tech journalism.
It's generous.
I'm all
like
about
that.
help and love. Yeah, it's all I do. No, I mean, weirdly enough, even though we've been off for 2 weeks, I went back and I was like, I have not written about legal tech in that entire 2-week span. So I had to find something else. But it is interesting. I've written in the past about the PACER situation and, how the federal courts, I'm not going to say that judges lied under oath, but anyway, they lied under oath multiple times about how PACER cost them $2 billion a year to run that shitty website and that's why they couldn't possibly not charge us an arm and a leg for everything. That finally petered out as an excuse that they could use, and they have responded by jacking up transcript costs. So they're going to jack up transcript costs by 20% over the next 2 years, which seems, to the question of lawyers raising rates below the rate of inflation, 20% is very much above the rate of inflation outside of like Zimbabwe in the 80s. It's a lot, right? And so it's going to make things really unpleasant for folks, and they're doing it because they can. I'm one of those folks who does not think that technology and a recorder with AI can't replace a court reporter. That said, the court reporter job can change, and it can become, what some vendors I've spoke to on the court reporting issue say, like, look, whether we want to protect court reporters or not, they're a declining profession because people just don't want to do that anymore, and those schools aren't there anymore. So something needs to happen. That said, the court reporter is still important. They're just no longer as important for the transcript part, or they are in the SCLO, but you could replace that with something tech related, but they need to be there for the policing of that transcript, for correcting things, for being at depositions, for being an official. Not that this affects depositions, but that's the role that the transition is coming toward. And it struck me as this increase was happening that the federal government is going to absolutely bleed us as a profession until that revolution comes, and probably for about 10 years after the revolution has hit everyone else.
Yeah, I feel like that wasn't. I'm on the fence about that one only because the court reporters need to get paid a fair rate, and what they were getting paid was falling behind inflation for court reporters and the fees in the federal courts. So, I'm sympathetic to that. At the same time, there's this whole question of, do we even really need court reporters anymore? As you suggest. Some of you folks probably know, like every time I hop on a call now, I have my AI transcription software that jumps on the call with me. And at the end of the call, I have my little transcript of the call, and it's a wonderful thing. And it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn perfect. And how much would it take to just have a couple of lawyers go over that transcript after and see if they could agree on it or something? I don't know. There's obviously other options, and you kind of wonder how much longer for the world court reporters are gonna be a thing.
Although I have to say, Bob, the chances of two adversarial lawyers ever agreeing on anything that was said in a deposition,
that's
transcript,
true,
are probably pretty.
But
low,
you can also have a recording. You can have a recording, and then you can have a transcript from the
right.
recording, and then.
I think I think there's always going to be a place for court reporters, but they're going to have to do it differently than what they're doing. One reporter sitting in one room with three people, taking testimony for 6 days that's a pretty inefficient way of doing things when we have, transcription services and voice recognition. And I mean, there are other more efficient ways that could be done. And I think that's probably what we're going to have to see. Plus, as we all know, that there are declining numbers of court reporters already. And so that has to be dealt with, because there's going to still have to be some sort of transcript, even as we
Well,
go forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I was going to say transcriptionists and court reporters are two different things, right? I mean, transcriptionists can solve your problem of adversarial lawyers not agreeing what was on the record. You don't need the person sitting live to do it if there's a recording.
Right.
Well, and one benefit of the declining number of court reporters is it's one less party for people to confuse women attorneys with. So
Right? Yeah.
that's a nice added bonus.
What are they going to think we are, though?
Maybe the paralegal. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
But-
true. Yeah.
And I will also have to say, in my years of taking depositions, and particularly depositions, not so much in a courtroom, but the presence of a court reporter does lend a sort of an air of formality that might not otherwise be there, whether it's justified or not. Certainly to the witness, I think the witness in most depositions sort of looks at the court reporter as someone with having some authority, even though they don't, and the lawyers sort of do too. I mean, the court reporter can often control a bit about what's going on. They may not be able to control bad behavior, but they can certainly control the pace and things like that. So, it could be a place for them in some fashion. At least I hope. I mean, I hate to see them go away entirely.
Well, somebody
there's
mentioned
also-
the.
There's also the exhibit factor for cases that are maybe not sophisticated enough to have all the online technology, or small in-person cases where they have physical evidence still. Court reporter still plays a role in that.
Yeah.
Well, I was
Just go ahead, Nikki. I'm sorry.
I was talking to a company, I think it was at Ilticon. I can't remember the name of it, but they offered a variation on that concept where they had people that were there to maintain the record. But they were like,
Yeah.
I think it was remote court reporters. I can't remember the name of the company, but
Yeah,
there
I
was
saw
someone
them
there
too,
who
yeah.
fulfilled that specific role
Right.
in the absence of a court reporter.
The readback
No,
people. That was they had a
Yeah.
really clever demo that they
Yeah.
did where they took you into a booth and you went into sort of a virtual deposition, and they had this comedian acting as a lawyer. It was a wonderful thing.
It was
they did.
a lot. I did that
It was-
too. It's a lot. But one
it was
thing I've
fun.
noticed of late is that there are becoming more national sort of court reporting services, as opposed to when I was a younger lawyer, it was all done locally. Now that it's a lot more national, and the national services in some respects are becoming more like technology companies and offering various technological products for use with exhibits, for use with virtual depositions and hearings and remote transcriptions, and setting all that up. And so it's kind of evolving away from firms offering transcription to firms offering certain technologies that could be used in litigation, courtroom and depositions.
Yeah. I mean, it's somebody mentioned the reading back of the transcript, or the reading back of the testimony issue. And again, if you've seen any of these electronic deposition platforms that are out there, they're creating a real time rough transcript of the proceeding, so you can at any time stop and go back and review the question, the text of the question and answer. Don't get me wrong, I love having. I still sit as an arbitrator. I love the hearings where we have a court reporter, because they just make it easier. I don't have to worry about taking notes so much. As others have said, they help with the exhibits and all of that. But just like to Dennis's analogy, I liked it when somebody would tell me what floor to get off on the elevator too, but they're not doing that anymore.
Well, and I liked Stephen's comment about how having a court reporter sort of encourages a little bit of decorum. And in some ways, it's somewhat akin to the idea of why people oppose having cameras in the courtroom, because everyone's going to change the way that they behave because the cameras are there and litigate to the camera. This is a slightly different concept, but it's the idea that this person who's actually taking notes is a reminder that your testimony is being recorded versus a software running in the background or a tape recorder, whatever it's going to be, which is less of a reminder. So people might be a little more unhinged if you don't have the court reporter sitting there reminding them that they're on the record. So it is an interesting change in dynamic that will, if court reporters do start to decline as we expect, I wonder how that's going to affect the decorum of depositions, and if there's going to be like an increase in the getting the court involved more often to try to get people to be more compliant or answer the questions being asked or whatever the case may be in a deposition.
Yeah, there are a number of courts, I know in Massachusetts, and I assume elsewhere, in which the recording run by the judge is the official record of the proceeding, especially in some of the lower courts in Massachusetts, like the district courts. There's a tape recorder running, and not a tape recorder, whatever it is, a digital recorder running, and that's the official record, and that's it. And the judge has the on-off switch sitting there on the bench, and so whether Pacer needs to be charging us for this, I don't know. Back to the original question. So Niki, what do you got this week?
Well, I submitted my ABA journal article that rounds up the software that I've written about over the year. And what I do every year is I write an article that sums up in November all the articles I've written for the year. And then in December, I write one that talks about the highlights in terms of legal tech news for the year. So this was a November one where I summed up the software and the other things that I wrote about. And I think what's interesting, especially as we're going through the pandemic, is looking back to see the topics that I identified as we were going through this as being relevant. So the column focuses on, for the most part, software or services for lawyers. And each month I focus on a specific type of service or software. And I go over a description of it. I explain why lawyers need it, how to go about choosing it, making educated decisions about it. And then I just provide a brief outline of what's available in the market in terms of the most well-known products, and provide some information like pricing and that type of thing. Since the pandemic started, part of what I do is I look to see which articles that I write a couple of years ago that could need to be updated because the market's changed or the products have changed. And then I also try to identify issues or topics or needs that lawyers may have given the unique circumstances we're experiencing at any given time. And on the tail end of the pandemic, you can sort of see by looking through my article that very much affected what I covered. The first 2 months, January and February, were summarizing the results from the My Case Legal Industry Survey that I authored from last year, the 2021 industry report. I definitely take a look at that. Like I said, the 2022 one is coming out in 2 weeks, and it dovetails on some of the information from that report. A lot of new data, also includes some of the benchmark report data. So keep an eye out for that. And I'll probably write about that at least once in my article next year to summarize in this column, like what was in the news survey. But then, when you move in through the year, I wrote about remote deposition tools because we're just talking about that now. That is increasingly in demand, in part because of the pandemic and in part because everyone realized how beneficial and what how it can be very cost saving to have these remote depositions. So I covered those to highlight the availability in the market of those types of tools. And then the remote court transcription technology, because that dovetails with the remote deposition and this idea that court reporters' roles are changing and that there are oftentimes some more cost-effective ways to transcribe what's happening in court as well. And then trial presentation software. A lot of the trial presentation software has included some virtual options as well because they had to add that option during the pandemic. And again, that also becomes relevant, having this ability to use this software both in court and in virtual trials as well. And that software just makes it a lot easier for people to present their case to the jury or to the fact finder, but also it's much more affordable now because it's cloud-based. And so it used to be only the large firms could afford this, but now there's all sorts of options ranging from iPad apps to cloud-based software that are available and much more affordable for solo and small firm attorneys as well. And it levels the playing field a bit there. E-filing was on the rise before the pandemic, but the pandemic forced everyone to, they had to have digital documents, right? They had to figure out how to get digital documents, store them, maintain them, and also file them. And so e-filing definitely increased as a result of that trend. And so I wanted to highlight e-filing services that are available because those services are so disparate, right? Like not the services, but the systems that the lawyers have to interact with, the websites. It varies from court to court, even within a specific jurisdiction or even within a specific level of court. The interfaces are all so different that it's challenging for lawyers to navigate them, especially since some of the interfaces and websites feel like they're from the 90s. So these e-filing services solve that problem. Lawyers don't have to worry that they're going to miss a deadline because they did it incorrectly. These companies will file it for you. They don't all handle all the different jurisdictions, but as I talk about in my article, one of them will probably handle the jurisdictions that you need, and you can outsource that to a company. Website chat tools, again, people are interacting online more, and legal consumers expect the ability to have questions answered outside of normal business hours because they've gotten used to that online interaction. So I highlighted website chat tools, and then legal technology directories. There have been some.
That was the best. I enjoyed that one the most.
Best article ever. There have been some additions to legal tech directories, including yours, Bob. So I wanted to highlight those to help lawyers make these educated decisions about the software products and tools that I talk about in this column. Then law firm websites. Again, lawyers are updating their websites because they need more modern interfaces because legal consumers expect it. So I updated a prior article that I'd written on tools and providers that help you create a better website, ranging from consultants, legal specific consultants, or even practice management companies or other legal software companies that will build those for you. And then finally, in October, I wrote about virtual receptionist services, which are another thing that has been trending. Really, actually, as I go through this, all of them were in part impacted by the pandemic. More and more lawyers understand the value of having a virtual receptionist, either just for overflow or for off hours, or for when something like the pandemic happens that displaces them from their office. So that was another category of services that I highlighted. And then next, like I said, next month's column is going to focus on trending news topics from the past year.
And the big news out of all that was there are still lawyers who don't have websites.
Right?
Yeah, that was the thing at CleoCon, right? Like
Right.
they came up with a new product to help them because there's so many that still don't have them.
Right.
And we've had one, my case has offered websites for probably 7 or 8 years now that we designed for our customers that'll have the client portal, have lead intake forms built in, and that interact with our software to make it easier. So I think that's definitely becoming a trend, or at least a service that lawyers need more often.
Yeah. Your columns are great in the ABA Journal, and just really useful surveys of different areas of legal tech and what's available out there.
What's interesting though is her articles in Above the Law are better than those, just so everyone knows.
I like all the different outlets because I write about different things. Above the Law, I like to write about stuff that's a little bit more edgy, or stuff that my articles there tend to have a little bit more of a informal way about them. And then my Daily Record articles are often cover ethical decisions or opinions that are handed down. And so I like having different outlets for different voices almost and different topics. It's fun. I appreciate all the opportunities to write.
Awesome.
Well, email me, Niki. We can contribute content too.
I'll keep that in mind.
Well, one other story I actually wanted to talk about this week. It's this story about this lawsuit between Akin Gump and this little legal tech company out of California. I don't know how many of you saw that at all. I think I put it on the log this week, but you try and be neutral about these things, but I've read over the pleadings, the complaint filed by Akin Gump and the answer and counterclaim filed by this little legal tech company. And I don't know, it's just such a strange suit. This is the one where this company has been around for what has been 20 years or something like that, developing software to help automate bill drafting, legislation drafting, and it's sort of like helps automate aspects of writing a bill and standardizes and creates templates and that sort of thing. And but this guy at Akin Gump, who has a lobbying practice there, a government relations practice or something, wanted to. It was kind of meeting with them to talk about whether that software would work for them. And at some point, it's not quite clear. They were talking about this idea that the tech company says it was an idea they were already working on, and the lawyer says it was his idea for kind of how to take this tech to the next step. But the bottom line was they went and essentially adapted products they had already created, and created a prototype of this next step, and kind of went back to the firm and showed them the prototype, and everybody was excited about it until the company said, well, you're gonna have to pay us some money now. We've been doing all this prototyping for you for free, not for you, but we've been doing all this prototyping and conversations with you for free, and if you want to use this product, you have to pay for it. And suddenly there was like, okay, who owns this? And Akin Gump went to court saying, our lawyer had the idea, and therefore we should we own it. And the tech company saying, no, we were already working on this, and even if he had an idea, we're the ones who developed it. We did the engineering on it and created it and applied our skill and expertise to bring it out. I don't know. It seems like one of those potential bad cases make bad law kinds of situations, but and there's a whole David versus Goliath aspect to it. Since of course Akin Gump is one of the largest law firms in the world, and this is a 25 lawyer tech company out of California. So I think this is going to be really interesting to watch how this develops. But I just kind of wonder why in the heck Akin Gump is pushing this. I don't really know what they expect to get out of this, or whether it just seems a little bit frivolous to me, I have to say. I don't know.
Well, it's definitely one of those things that makes you go, like, I agree with you. There's got to be something else going on that would be the impetus behind filing this lawsuit, because it's also just from a PR perspective, kind of not the best press. So they have to balance a lot of different factors when they decided to go forward with this. So I wouldn't be surprised. I think your hunch is correct. And over time, maybe we're going to learn a little bit more of the dirty laundry that's behind this thing that maybe isn't so readily apparent at first.
Yeah. I mean, one interesting reference in the Akin Gump complaint was that this lawyer who had the idea was sort of jockeying to be recognized within the firm as like the innovator of the year or something like that, and so had a lot at stake personally, I guess, on this. But that doesn't really explain why the firm would do it. But so who knows?
Well, that's what I was wondering. Like, is it a big ego? But it would have to be a big ego who is a significant rainmaker to have that much influence to bypass, to overrule all the other concerns that are evident when you file a lawsuit like this, just in terms of like press and expense, Yeah. So I find it hard to believe. My initial thought, the exact like same thing you did, like maybe it's ego, but it'd have to be a pretty significant person's ego to make that happen. So I feel like there must be something else, but maybe that's all it is. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, and the question in the comments, is there something more in the underlying IP? I mean, I feel like it would have to be something really cool, for lack of a better word, for them to do this too, because like you said, it's such bad PR, the David Goliath aspect of it. But I mean, maybe there is something really special in there, but I highly doubt it. I don't know. I'm curious.
Well, and you also have to consider the fact that, when you file a lawsuit, you have to be a witness, you have to have depositions. So you've got probably a number of partners that are going to be dealing with this lawsuit that bill out at very high rates that are going to have to take time away from billing clients. So that there better be something worth it to them all to do that, I would think.
It reminds me a little bit of the Thomson Reuters, right? That sued Ross.
Yeah,
It reminds me,
Thomson
it has
Reuters
a little
versus
bit of
Ross.
that feel.
It does
So-
definitely. Well, the David Goliath aspect to it, for sure. But it's a very different. Seems very different in other ways. I mean, the Thomson Reuters one is more. Well, they're both kind of involve alleged theft of intellectual property in a sense, but in different contexts.
Yeah, and like Thomson
Yeah,
Reuters,
it's a-
their core product, you know what I mean, that
Yeah,
they
that's
offer.
what I was just
This
going to
isn't
say.
like
Yeah.
Akin Gump's core product. Their core product is their legal services. So there's
Right.
definitely a distinction.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a little bit of a connection to the legal journalism world in that the president of this legal tech company used to be one of the top executives at Dolan Media, which used to own some of the papers that Niki writes for, and for which I was actually temporarily employed many years ago as at one of their papers, and he comes out of a legal journalism background, legal journalism background actually. So there's that connection too. Anything else? Good of the order? Anything else anybody want to talk about this week?
There's always the evolving shit show of Twitter.
Really? Well, we were just talking before we signed on about who's gotten onto Mastodon or not, and whether we're all. And I was trying to figure out whether Victor Lee. I was wishing Victor was here this week because it looks like he might have canceled his Twitter account, but can't find him there anymore. The username he had before says his account's is no longer valid. I'm going to be going off this week to the Legal Tech Fund summit, their inaugural summit down in Miami. So I don't think we'll do a show next week because I'm going to be flying home next Friday afternoon. But sorry to disappoint you.
Stephanie and I are gonna be in the same place, so we already were like plotting out like how to have a
whole
camera
plan.
so that we could both be on, and
We were going to do like a
Oh.
Statler and Waldorf thing in the same room.
yeah.
Where are you going to
Ruin
be?
it, Bob.
Well, maybe we can set it up. I don't know. Maybe there's a way to set it up. I can check into it. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be on a flight like literally at that time. So we'll see.
Avatars.
Avatars, yeah. But it's interesting because I guess I knew this at some point, but they were just reminding me today that it's all off the record. So I'm going, but I can't actually report on any of it. But
That's super interesting because we were trying to figure out, we were going to try to send our Florida person. So good to know.
yeah,
Maybe that's why
yeah.
it didn't happen.
Yeah, I think what I can do is if people want to sit down and talk to me separately and whatever and write about that or record a podcast or something, I can do that, but I can't cover any of the sessions. So that will be interesting. But well, when we get back together, I'll let you know how that goes. And until then, hope everybody stays well. And if we're not here next week, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks to everybody for being here today.
So long, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.